Hello and hi. Earlier on this week, I was able to take a short trip to New York again and see a show that I wanted to see for a while as soon as I found out about it. And normally, I really haven't done too many reviews on this channel, especially theater reviews, but I have done it before with Beetlejuice, which was phenomenal. Oh my god! How did this not win any Tonys? How did this not win? It's not over yet.
I know, but it's still so good.
I'm so excited right now because we got through like the first act and now we're getting to like the spooky stuff and everything's amazing. I am in love with it. After seeing the show, I really wanted to be able to talk about it because it's so important, it's so underrated, and unfortunately it closed way too soon. How to Dance in Ohio just came on Broadway only a few months ago and already closed. And I was able to see the closing performance, which was the first time I ever got to see a closing performance on Broadway. So that alone, I knew going into it was going to be an experience. So I do have a lot of footage to share soon from the closing dialogue that they did, the message they gave, which was amazing. We'll get to that. First, let's explain what the show is. So How to Dance in Ohio was a original musical inspired by a documentary of the same name that was produced by HBO. It's on Max. That's where I was able to watch it again. And as I was watching it, I was shocked because one of the producers was Blumhouse. And if you're familiar with Blumhouse, you will know that they do nothing but horror films. So the fact that they did a documentary on autistic people was such a hilarious shock to me, and I need to share that because people need to know. People need to know about that. Why? I love it. It's great. It's a wonderful fact. Doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. So the documentary came out in 2015 and it inspired them to work on this Broadway show. And if you know, and they'll also talk about it in the footage I have, how Prince was on board with helping, and this was one of the last projects that he was able to do, which that fact alone makes it legendary. Okay, if you're in the Broadway community like I am, you know how influential and important how Prince was, and therefore another important fact to share. The documentary itself focused on 7 different autistic kids, young adults, just navigating the world, and the Broadway show does the exact same thing. 7 autistic young adults navigating the world and preparing for this dance that they're coming together for. And that's same as that's the ending of the documentary as well. That's the goal of it. So documentary and the show have the same exact plot line, but the show goes into more embellishment and changes a couple of things to make it more narratively bound.
The show is based on things that actually happened, but parts have been embellished for dramatic purposes. You have to spice things up in Ohio.
Which I honestly love what they did, genuinely. The really cool thing too was that the doctor who created this program from the documentary, Dr. Amigo, was actually in the audience the day we saw it, a couple of rows in front of us. And all I saw was, after every single song, someone jumping up and giving a standing ovation, which I loved that they were so into it in the first place. And then I learned out later, hey, that's the real Dr. Amigo. So it was just, there was so much coolness to it. There was such a great community while we were there. And it was such a positive experience, and I adored every moment of it. The funny thing was, going into the show, I really didn't know too much about it, especially because it was so brand new. In fact, when I was walking by the theater when they were first going into previews a couple of months ago, we were walking by because I was in New York to see Some Like It Hot, which again, I'm still bitter that it closed because that is one of my favorite musicals now, and definitely one of my hyperfixations that I've been listening to the soundtrack with since I saw it and before I saw that. But I was walking by the theater while I was seeing that show and saw the How to Dance in Ohio marquee. And my first thought was, what is this show? And is this an emo rock musical? Because blame Hawthorne Heights for that one. I genuinely thought from this look that it could have been like, you know, an emo rock musical, Hawthorne Heights style. I'm not even a Hawthorne Heights fan, but obviously their song is iconic. Anyways, clearly it was not about that, and instead it was this really heartwarming story that needed to get shared and needs to still be talked about. This show was so important in so many ways. It was so groundbreaking in so many ways, and it had so many firsts that no other show on Broadway has done before, which is shocking in itself. The history of Broadway is over a century old. It's over 100 years old. And this also opens up a bigger discussion about representation and how long, not only in Broadway, not only in theater, but in general media and mainstream media, it's taken for every representation to be portrayed in a genuine, organic way. And it's a shame that we're so behind as a human species on it. The neurodivergent community and the autistic community is probably the most underutilized and underrepresented community because it is a invisible issue. And it's not an issue per se, because I am also neurodivergent here, so of course I can be a part of that discussion because I have the experience for it and it's definitely relatable. But I think part of my journey in accepting that I definitely have a neurodivergent brain was hidden for many years because of the fact that I never had the representation to show me that this is okay and this is normal and you can succeed. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of shame that had been put, and there still is, with anyone who is neurodivergent, who is ADHD, who is autistic. Any labels that you have, personally, I've always felt ashamed about it. And it hasn't been until the last couple of years for me to start accepting and being happy with the parts of my brain that are the way they are.
Today for this very, very special final performance of How to Dance in Ohio. My name is Ben Holtzman, and along with my two partners, Sammy Lopez and Fiona, we are P3 Productions, and we are the producers of this show. I'd like to acknowledge some folks who joined us on stage after the show, including our amazing swings, all of our story about the origin of this beautiful musical, which started 6 years ago when Jacob found the documentary on HBO and shared it with his writing partner, who had shared it with a group of young producers who had just met them and were looking for their first project to build from the ground up. At the time, I was working in the office of Hal Prince, who was my mentor for the last 4.5 years of his life. Someone point to the HP up in the corner. Around the time that I met Jacob and Rebecca, Hal was opening his final Broadway musical, Prince of Broadway, and he was looking for a new show to collaborate on. And he expressed to me that he was interested in exploring autism in a musical. And I was very, very ambitious as a young assistant and said, I have the project for you. And I brought Jacob and Rebecca up to meet with Hal, and they just clicked immediately and decided that they wanted to embark on this project together, which I think for anyone who was involved in those early days can say it was the most formative experience of theater making. What I didn't know at the time was that Hal was already very, very familiar with the documentary, as Alexandra Shiva, the amazing documentary, close family friend of the Prince's, and as it turned out, the documentary is dedicated to Hal's granddaughter, Lucy.
Wow.
So, as you can see, it was really written in the stars that this project was supposed to start. And for anyone who knew Hal Prince or knows his body of work, you know that his entire career was dedicated to new artists and telling new types of stories on Broadway. And that's exactly what we intended to do with this production. And everything about it, from start to finish, is dedicated to Hal's legacy and Hal's memory.
We would also like to take a moment to acknowledge all of the real-life documentary participants who were so incredibly instrumental to the development of this piece, so gracious with their time, with us, with all of the artists involved. So this is a shout out to the Amigo Family Counseling Center. Within the Amigo Family Counseling, we are so lucky to have two very instrumental people in the audience with us tonight, both the documentary filmmaker Alexandra Shiva, as well, we are so grateful to have the centerpiece of Amigo Family Counseling with us, the real Mr. Dr. Emilio.
When I found out about the show and really was able to start researching it, I was definitely intrigued by it. And it was something that I definitely wanted to check out when the weather got warmer, because here in the north, it's cold. And so I don't like to go out of my house if I don't have to. But as soon as I found out it was closing and a couple of weeks left in the closing, I'm like, I need to get tickets. I have to see the show. And I'm so happy that I did. As soon as they released the cast recording, a few days later, they announced that they were closing. So at least I was able to listen to the cast recording a few times before I went into the show. And this is the first experience that I've had where I barely knew anything about it. Like, I love being able to research and acknowledge what the plot of the show is and what the music of the show is, because theater tickets are expensive, okay? So you want to enjoy it and know that you're going into this fulfilled and expecting it. That's how I like to operate. So I got to listen to the soundtrack twice and then watch the documentary, and that was basically the only information I had going into it. Compared to the last two shows that I saw, Sweeney Todd and Some Like It Hot, I literally binged those soundtracks for months on end. They are both on my most Spotify playlist of music, and I will still go back and listen to the music because it's so good. And now How to Dance in Ohio is also on that list, and it's so good. It was awesome going into the theater because it was sold out for the final performance, and when they started the show, they literally got a standing ovation before they even started the show. All of the actors were phenomenal. They all had amazing voices. Between my friend and I that got to go, we definitely had our favorites of voices. And the standouts to me personally were Meredith and Caroline, and Jessica was awesome too. I know that he loved the character Jessica a lot. Ashley's voice was also phenomenal, and I loved her role in it, character-wise. But all of them were phenomenal, and they did such an amazing job. And I don't know if it's because I can relate to the neurodivergent mindset, or if these are genuine human experiences that everyone can relate to, but I related to the show a lot. And that's why it's so important, because I feel like this is such a grounded show. Referencing back, there are too many shows on Broadway that go into the fantasy world, and that's great. That's totally fine. I enjoy those stories. I mean, again, Some Like It Hot, which is another one of my top favorite musicals, was a classic Broadway show in a modern adaptation, and it has that nice razzle-dazzle old Hollywood feel to it. It's adapted from the Marilyn Monroe musical, which I love old Hollywood, so there are so many things I love about it, but it's not something that you can go and relate to and be like, wow, this is real life experience. There is a lot of level of fantasy to it. Same thing with Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd is literally a dramatic musical about a man who was unjustly framed because the judge wanted to hook up with his wife, so he put him in jail. It's a story of revenge and a crazy woman who wants to kill people and bake them into pies. The subtext is so important because the subtext is there and showcases the heartbreak and pain of this man who had to go through so much turmoil that he never deserved. So again, there are elements of realisticness there and obviously important storytelling and relatability to the narrative and for people to relate to, but you're not gonna go outside and see a bake shop of people getting killed to bake into pies, because that would be scary as shit. No. So the difference is, of course, those are like both really high functioning stories that have bits of realism in there to make it relatable to people, but it's still a lot more of a fantasy tale compared to actual real life events that happens. And so that's the difference. This definitely caused me to go down a rabbit hole to go back and think about all of the shows that I've seen. And I'm really, really grateful of how privileged I've been to be able to have seen so many shows on Broadway. And I started ranking them for my top 10 because I'm like, oh, I've seen so many, but there's been so many recently that have been astonishing and phenomenal in so many different ways. And this one definitely within my top 5 because of the fact that it is so realistic. These are events that happened to real people and it's so grounded of a show. It's so realistic of a show and it's so simplistic of a show, and we need that. We really need stories like that. It's great to have the fun fantasy stories, but we really need a balance and also have that to get more in touch with ourselves, get more in touch with being terminally human, as they say in the show, and to really understand who we are.
I did want to take a second to acknowledge and focus on all that we have accomplished in our run, even in the short amount of time it was. We got to share the show with 99 audiences. We got to record an original Broadway cast album. We made 45 Broadway debuts. And we also made history. Never has Broadway had this many openly actually autistic actors on stage. And I think that it's like we have a long way to go, but this was a very first step in saying like accessibility for the most marginalized of us, it will eventually be accessibility for all of us.
Yeah.
Like fact. And thank you to you all, to all of the incredible. I want to also like the autistic fans are a make-up. So grateful for every single one of our fans, and also the autistic subset within that has been sharing this show, and felt seen by this show, and that's who we do it for. That's the gift of the show. Yes, this show was about 7 young autistic adults facing challenges, and it was wonderful that 12 autistic people were cast to play actually autistic characters. But also, this show was about finding community on and off stage. It was about communication. It was about different ways of approaching romance. It was about connection. It was about queer characters existing with love and with young adults. We're not children. Showcasing autistic people of color who are underdiagnosed, being able to tell our story exist. It was about one of the first, if not the first actor from Taiwan on Broadway. 7 people working on achieving their goals, no matter how big or small they seemed, and they all did. And they all supported each other through it all, alongside their families, blood and chosen, just like y'all supported us and like we have supported each other. Shows like this aren't supposed to make it to Broadway, but here we are. This is not the end, this is only the beginning. Thank you all for dancing with us.
It's raw, it's real, it's subtle, it's grounded, and it was so underrated. Even the music is obviously so important in a musical. I mean, that literally is the main draw of why it's called a musical. But I listened to the soundtrack twice, like I said, and it has now been on repeat every single day since I've seen the show. And now I love it because I feel like even any CD, any album you listen to, it doesn't have to be related to theater, it could be anything. I like that there are songs you give it a listen to. A lot of the times you listen to it a couple times so it doesn't really click in, and once you get comfortable with it, then you start picking up the nuances, you start picking up pieces that you love about it, and they become your favorites. And that's what happened here, because definitely building momentum from the beginning, that one caught me and I knew I loved it. And then the Waves and Wire song I also loved a lot, but everything else was very subtle. I'm like, okay, this sounds nice, but I didn't have an attachment to it. And then I saw the show and I love what they did with it. I love the choreography and the lighting, everything that they did with the show. And even they had the rotating table and they used it so well. The rotating circle like they had in Hamilton or Hadestown. A lot of shows have used it, and I'm so happy they used it with this. And it added another element of great choreography and just the nuances, and I loved it so much. It was so smart. The show is so smart. And even with they had behind on the stage, they had all these different letters, of course, on the stage, and where the lighting was, the letters were lit up. And during the Waves and Wire song, they start kind of lighting and going around, and the lights kind of flicker and they move like circuits, and I love what they did, and I really, really want a pro shot.
We also just want to let you know there will be a future for this show.
The other thing that I really love that they did is because this was a show built by the autistic community for the autistic community and fans, they really made sure to have a nice sensory guide and accessibility guide in here. And so it's awesome because they had cool down spaces in the theater. It was really crowded. Otherwise I would have tried to have gotten footage of it, but yeah, I think it's on their Instagram. We need more shows like this. That's the main message. We need more shows like this, because the fact that it's taken over 100 years to get anything like this at all on Broadway is a major problem. And this also would launch into a bigger soapbox discussion that I have, that all of these great shows are closing way too early in favor for these star-studded cast revivals, which that I'm okay with, because I'm really happy that Sweeney Todd is finally getting its time to shine, because the material was originally original, and Sondheim is a genius that is acquired when I didn't understand him when I was younger, but now I'm like obsessed to, if it's not these revivals, then there's these adaptations of these movies that are turned into musicals, and a lot of the times they don't work. I say that because obviously Beetlejuice really did work, and they did a phenomenal job, and I adore that musical, clearly. But why do we need Back to the Future? Why do we have Back to the Future the musical? We do not need it. Yeah, it's another element of this to cause a discussion over, because I feel like these shows that are amazing and original are not getting the chance to get their footing, and they're getting closed too early to be replaced with these crazy things. It's not all movie musical adaptations, because Some Like It Hot was also a movie musical adaptation, but the difference was it was so far time-wise from the original movie that was from the 50s. We're in 2024, so it's crazy. It was 70 years difference. Oh my god, I'm old. I wasn't alive during the 50s, but that's crazy to think about. Just the fact that that didn't even last either. So it's a major problem on Broadway, and that's a huge discussion that we could go into, but I could literally talk about that for hours. I just wish that they would be more on brand with pro shots. I really wish that this could have a pro shot, because it's perfect as is. I love how simplistic it was. I love how genuine all the characters interacted with each other. It felt really real. Obviously they're acting, they're playing parts, but I really loved the genuineness of how every family member, every friend interacted with each other, and it just felt like you were watching everything play out organically. I love the stories that each of the characters went through. I loved the character development that they went through, and I have nothing but positive things to say about this show. I do not have any negative notes. The music all blends together so well. I just hope that they're able to come bring a pro shot, because I think it works the best on stage and to show that professionally. I am all on board with more pro shots. I wish that they would do that. I will give you the money for that, because I feel like a lot of times I'm privileged to be able to go see a show in New York, but there's still a lot of shows that I miss because I'm not going to see every single show that appears. And in other circumstances, there were shows that I have definitely missed out on and slept on because I never took them seriously. The two perfect examples of that, SpongeBob the Musical and Shrek the Musical. I never took them seriously because they were adaptations from a cartoon or a movie, and so I thought it would be a cash grab because I could not take it seriously, and both of them came out with a pro shot, and I'm so happy they did, because now they are some of my favorites I love listening to, and I see how much heart and soul was put into each of the productions, and I wouldn't have known that if I didn't watch the pro shot. The other part of that would be, obviously, a lot of people can't go to see it because a lot of people are not in New York. I know I was going on TikTok, and of course when Josh Groban was still in Sweeney Todd, so many people were making videos how they were so upset they weren't able to travel to New York to be able to see him perform as Sweeney Todd. I got to do that. I'm very grateful for it. I know I'm privileged in that aspect, but it is true, and I really wish that they made the whole Broadway community more accessible for everyone to enjoy, because there's so many stories that are important to tell and for people to see that aren't local to the area. And I know the theater community is so niche, but there's theater fans all over the world. And sure, you can go on tour, and I'm sure a lot of people will go on tour and see the shows when they come into their area. But a lot of times, especially when a show has closed down, I want to go back and revisit it. Literally this week, I've been through a rabbit hole on Broadway, and I've been trying to look up all the slime tutorials I could find so I could revisit the shows I loved seeing 10 years ago, because my memory is only so strong, and there were parts of it that I remember, but parts of it I forgot. So it was awesome to be able to go back and watch these slime tutorials to revisit and find my love again and realize what parts of the show I adored, because they closed 10 years ago. I was watching Hedwig and the Angry Inch with Neil Patrick Harris, which I loved. Top favorite musical. Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, loved. Also top one of my favorite musicals. And I also realized that a lot of my musicals that I love are all about death or human interaction and experience and trauma. Obviously this is included in that. Like I said, that's a huge discussion. I'm really grateful I got to see this. I really hope that there's a lot more in the future with it. And I want it to be more successful and popular. We need more shows like this to be more successful and popular. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And until then, I will see you in the next one.